All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're talking about customizing our navs, sort of positioning things, the different items in there in different ways, but we're really using them as a way of discussing Flexbox, a larger topic within Bootstrap. So navs are not the only thing that we can position and manipulate with Flexbox. There are many other things that we can use, but we're going to use navs as the way to talk about it. So if you're not familiar with Flexbox at all, this is a thing that exists outside of Bootstrap. This is not going to be a comprehensive introduction. I have, just to give you an idea of how large a topic it can be, I have a course that spends like 4+ hours just on Flexbox. So if you are totally new to it, it might be a little overwhelming, but you should still be able to control your navs, move things around, because honestly, at the end of the day, it's just a couple of classes you have to add, just like anything else. You can always refer to the docs. You know, nobody is quizzing you to make sure that you memorize everything. You just aren't going to be a Flexbox expert outside of the Bootstrap world. But within Bootstrap, you should be able to do what you want. Okay, so what am I talking about? So there's a Flex utility under Utilities, Flex. And we're going to come back to this in a moment. But if we go to navs, the same page we were on earlier, on the right side, if you click to, there's two things, available styles. So far, our navs have all been aligned to the left like this. And this talks about how you can use the Flexbox utilities, which I have open here, to align things to the middle, for example, or the right, or how to make a vertical nav, or how to make one vertical at one point, like basically responsive. How do you make it vertical on an extra small versus row layout on small? And there's actually much more that we could do. For example, we might want to spread them out. So we could center them, or we could have them all take up as much space as possible. You know, we could put them in a column and have them go all the way across the column, or center them even in a column if you wanted to. Like right now, they're on the left side of a column. What if we want them in the middle of a column? So there's different things that we can do, and it all involves Flexbox. So let me show you some proof of that. Let's first just copy one of these over, just so I don't have to type it all myself. Let's say that this is the nav we're going to work with right here. We could have just copied it from our code from the last video. I have a new file, and here it is. Here's my nav. Okay, if we just inspect this nav right now, I'll make this full screen. What you should notice, hopefully it's here, is on the nav itself, display is set to be flex. So if I remove that, the default is that things are displayed in a column, but because it has display flex, all these items are in a row right now. And there's a lot of different things we can do. Essentially, the way Flexbox works is we have a box of space. This is our box of space right now. And we can control where our elements go. Right now, they're all at the start, the left side. We could push them all to the end, which would be over here. We could put them in the middle. We can spread them out. We can do all sorts of things. So if you go to the Flex documentation, Utilities, Flex, it talks about, first of all, if you want to enable Flexbox on an element, which navs have by default, right? We never explicitly said, make this Flexbox. Instead, when we make a nav, you get that for free. That's how they work. So this is how you could add Flexbox to something that isn't already a Flexbox. I don't even know if you're supposed to say a Flexbox. That's not already display flex. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So this is some of the stuff we care about. Direction. So we have flex row. This is the default. And you can see here, flex row is the browser default. Flex row reverse is still a row, but the order of the items is reversed. Basically, think of an arrow going from left to right here is completely reversed. So this is our start and this is our end. So if I wanted to, I could actually just give this class flex row reverse to my nav. And I'm not going to save yet. This is what it looks like right now. We have active and then disabled at the end. If I save, now it's the complete opposite direction. This is our start and this is our end. So you probably have no use for that with a nav. I can't imagine you would just want to reverse it. But other things we can do, and this is definitely commonly used, we could take our nav and turn it into a column. So instead of flex row, which is the default, we could say flex column. And you can see they also come with responsive just like some of these other things we've seen, like display, flex small row. So here's a common use case. Let's just show flex column right now. If I do flex column, they're stored in a column. If instead I want them to be in a column on the small size or extra small, like here, but then I want it to expand into a row after that, I could do flex column, and then I could come in and say, once we hit the small breakpoint, set it to row. And you can see now we're at a row. We're at a column at extra small, that's a default. And then anything above that, we stay at a row. And you could change this to be large if you wanted to. So now it's a column always until we hit the large breakpoint right there. Okay, so that's one thing that you can do. Now the other things to talk about, I'm going to duplicate this so we have another example. And this second one, instead of having them all on the left, let's say that I still want it to be a row, and I don't want to reverse the row, but I want the content over here. Instead of starting here, I want it to still start here, but I want the content to be aligned with the end of the row. If you go to Navs, it actually explains how to do that right here. There's a property called justify content end. There's also justify content start and justify content center. In fact, these are coming straight from this utility, Flexbox utility. Here are our different options. This is justify content start, justify content end, justify content center. This is called between, where all the available space is divided evenly between the elements. And then there's also around, where all the extra space is divided around them. So let me show you what those look like. We won't do every single one, but this one, let's do, I'm going to get rid of the responsive stuff and just say justify dash content end. And there we go. It goes all the way to the end. Let's do one more. And this one will be center. Looks good. And we can also do things like between. And so now they start and end at the same spot, if that makes sense. There's a box on all of these going all the way across our container. Now the extra space is divided evenly. And then lastly, we have between. And I'll add labels to these. Lastly, we have around. So the space is added around and between them. Okay, I updated it just a bit with some text to explain what you're looking at. Not the prettiest page we've made, but you can see that just with this little class, by making something flex, which a nav is by default, when you give it this class nav, it's already made flex. This single control, this single class, we can move things around quite a bit. Now there's a lot more that we can do. Also, all of these are responsive. So you could do something like this if you wanted to. Let's say, let's do one at the very bottom. Let's say I like how it looks. Let's see what looks good on mobile here. Let's say that I want them on mobile to be between like this. And then on the any other sizes, because I don't really like how it looks between when we get a lot of space. That looks kind of gross with all that space. So I want it to be at the start, justify content start. And then once we get to mobile, I want it to be between. I don't know. Let's just play around with it. We could do justify content around is the extra small size, and then justify content, and then a breakpoint like medium, and we'll have that do, let's do center. Okay, so this one at the bottom is justify content around right now. It's still around, and then we hit medium, and now they move to the center. So we don't have all this extra space. Now there's a ton more to Flexbox. I'm not going to go into all the details, but everything I just showed you, this is applying to a row. But if we change our flex direction to be a column, the same things still work. They just behave differently. So instead of, think of things going from left to right here. So when we center something or we move it to the end, to the right side, now imagine going from top to bottom. So when we say justify content end, our arrow, if we're working with a column, would go from the top down to the bottom. So then we would align the columns at the bottom or at the top if we did justify content start. So that same approach works. You're just flipping it on its head. Instead of left to right or right to left, you're going top to bottom. So on the Flex documentation, there's a lot of other properties. Align items is a different property we haven't discussed, but it's It relates to, okay, so if we have them all on the left or all on the right, what about the vertical space? Do we want them to be centered vertically like this? Do we want them to take up all of the space? There's different options. And the same applies when we're going the other direction with a column. How do we want them to work horizontally? Do they go all the way across? Are they on the left side in a column, the right side? So we're not going into all of that here, but it is all here. Just so you know, there's a property called align self. There's another property called fill. There's another one called grow and shrink, auto margins. There's a lot here. Like I said, Flexbox is a complicated topic on its own. We'll readdress Flexbox a bit when we talk about the grid system. But for now, really the properties that I'm concerned about have to do with justify content and also making things a row versus a column. Those are the most commonly used things that you would do to a nav. It's pretty rare that you're going to want, a vertical nav in a column and you want things to be aligned in different directions and get kind of crazy. Usually your navs are pretty straightforward, cohesive, all on the left, all on the right, all in a row, that sort of thing. So we also have these two shortcuts. If we want all of our items to fill up the available space, take up all of the available space, we can use nav-fill. So what this means is that instead of having the item actually end here and this being space in between, we're now having them go all the way up against each other. And you can do that with nav-fill. And then we also have another one called nav-justified, and this makes them all the exact same width. So they both fill all of the space up, all the available space. It's just in this one, they're not equal sizes when you do nav-fill. When we do nav-justified, they take up the same amount of space. Okay, so let's copy one of these just to demo that. I'm actually going to do 3 times. I'm going to paste it 3 times. And the first one I'm going to have no extra class on. The second one I'll have fill, and the third one I'll have justified. And let's see what it looks like. All right, so this first one, they don't take up all the available space. This second one, they do take up all the available space, but they're not the same size. And that's kind of difficult because these aren't very, here, let's make one of these really large. So you can see here that these are not the same size. This one has a lot more space around it because it's larger, sort of proportionate. Here, if I make this one a lot larger, it still takes up the same amount of space as this one does and this one. Anyway, so there's a lot here around navs and Flexbox. I know this is probably overwhelming. Really, what I think is most important is focusing on some of the things that I think are most important we did early on up here. Justify content. Also, when I showed how to make something change from a column to a row, this first example up here, that's something that you may want to revisit. I may have an exercise on that in a little bit. Next, I'm going to just do an optional review of Flexbox using buttons to show that it's not just navs. And we'll play around with them. Totally optional. It has nothing to do with navs or nav bars. It's sort of a sidebar. If you want to check it out, it's coming up next. Otherwise, after that video, we're talking about actual nav bars.